Good morning, all, and welcome to the distinguished annual event, the Queen Rania Teacher Academy Forum 2023, under the theme Revitalizing the Learning Experience to Reignite Inspiration and Passion. We would like to thank you all for attending this forum and welcome you. Established in 2009, the Queen Rania Teacher Academy is a non-profit institution that embraces the vision of Her Majesty Queen Rania Al Abdullah to enhance the quality of education by empowering teachers with necessary skills. QRTA provides innovative and high-quality professional development programs in Jordan and in the Arab world. QRTA effectively contributes to serving educators' community, reflecting its commitment to education development and enhancing educators' skills through a range of specialized initiatives. This includes opportunities for continuous learning and advanced training for teachers and school leaders. As part of these initiatives, QRTA hosts an annual forum, bringing together distinguished educators from around the world to exchange experiences and stimulate innovation in the field of education. This year, our forum stands out with dedicated workshops led by educators for educators. These workshops aim to enhance learners' knowledge and equip teachers with tools and skills to make the student learning experience more exciting and engaging. They also aim to provide students with means to explore the world around them, interact with international issues, and maintain a continuous curiosity for research and questioning. Before the start of today's workshop, we would like to remind you that you can obtain a certificate of attendance. We look forward to your participation in the feedback survey, which will be shared with you before the end of the workshop. Thank you for your cooperation and valuable presence. Please allow me now to introduce Ms. Violet Bawab, who is an educator in the National Orthodox School in Amman, Jordan. Ms. Violet?
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be working with you and talking to you today and learning along with you. Before we get started, you all have a message on the chat that's asking you to join my interactive presentation for today through clicking the link, or you can simply type join my quiz on any browser and enter the game code. So I would like to take a minute maybe just to make sure that we have as many people joined in there. The purpose of that would be that there are some interactive questions throughout the session, and it's very important that I take your input in, and of course there will be opportunities for discussion and talking about certain elements of this workshop content, but it would be great if you can all join. If I start the presentation and not everyone has joined, you can always join in through the link that's on the chat. So I will get started, and we have a good number of people joining, so thank you all for that. We will get started with the presentation. So, good morning, everyone. Today, our workshop is going to be under the title of Turning Learning Needs into Super Skills. Super skill set is a term or a concept that's really dear to my heart, and maybe throughout it'll be clear why this is. I will start by a simple introduction relatively simple, of who I am and why I am actually here today. So when we're introducing ourselves, we often tend to introduce ourselves in one element of our lives or one element of our existence, and we forget a lot of others. So I try to include as many as I can. So for a start, I'm a human being. And that at current times is very important. I am a mother. I'm a mother of two girls. Good age range, 21 to 12 right now. And I am a learner before being an educator. I'm really passionate about learning that my daughters usually get jealous of me and get mad at me because I keep provoking that at home. I am very eager to learn about so many new fields. I do a lot of courses and a lot of personal research. I have a bachelor degree in business administration, which is kind of unrelated to anything I've done in my career. And I'm currently in progress of obtaining a master's of education through University of the People. Wish me luck with the crazy workload and juggling the million things that you'll understand why I do at some point. I'm a human being again. I'm an artist of some sort. I'm a chef sometimes. I'm a mentor and I'm a friend. And in terms of education, I've been in the education field for 14 years, and that's really an amazing number for me because I used to look up to those people who say, oh, I've been teaching for 14 years. And I've taught at 3 different schools. I am currently at the National Orthodox School. I've taught a range of the humanities. So basically, I always call myself the joker of the humanities. British and DP curriculum. I currently teach psychology for A levels and global politics for the IB. And I hope that gives you, most importantly, I'm a neurodivergent. And that's going to be the running theme of our workshop today. A neurodivergent is somebody who's diverse in terms of their brain and how their brain is wired. And that's going to be the theme of what we're going to talk about, ADHD or not ADHD. It's just that I think my brain is wired differently and it gives me quite an advantage sometimes and a challenge in some others. So the objectives of this workshop are going to be split up maybe or not even split up in terms of sequence, but they are under 3 different categories. The first aim or objective that I have is to raise awareness on a mental health disorder or a mental health condition that is misunderstood around the world, not just in Jordan. And I want to raise awareness on the concept of neurodivergence or neurodiversity. By doing that, I would aim to help our community maybe embrace diversity. And then I would like to work on breaking down the stigma around mental health diversity. And I'm not going to say mental health conditions because that's going to be a different category of things that we don't relate to right now. And then I would like to hopefully add value to all our journeys as educators in one way or the other, through maybe giving tips, tricks, simple techniques that are really not as challenging as we consider them to be or as we worry that they might be, in light of making our journeys as educators really valuable and hopefully, and obviously that will reflect on our students' well-being and growth. And now it's time for everyone to tell me about themselves. If I may ask you, on the next screen, you'll have a question, and that question will appear on your presentation screen. Please answer the question. I will give a couple of minutes for everyone to answer. And as we go, I'll try and look through the answers so that I can actually engage you specifically to your fields of education expertise, and so I can gear out examples that work for and help all of us. If you haven't joined the presentation yet, I would highly appreciate it that you do. The admin of the forum have just sent the link again on the chat. So I would like to ask you if you can tell me a little bit more about your experience, the grade levels you teach, and the subject or subject groups you have experience in. And I'll give you all a couple of minutes for that. If anyone is having a hard time answering or logging into the presentation, please feel free to send the answer to this question on the chat of the workshop right now, on the session. Okay. As you all enter your answers, I will just be looking through them so that I can have a better idea to work through today. So, one social studies teacher so far, so one person on the same side of the academic spectrum here. English, math, sciences. Some Arabic teachers, meet أهلا وسهلا فيكم. I hope you understand that I will have to conduct the whole workshop in English. أهلا وسهلا ست مي. It would be excellent if you actually please include the program that you teach as well. It'll be good for me to pull out some references and links too. And thank you for those who are answering on the chat. I can see that too. All right. Ms. Rawan, we have a lot to learn from you then, so please feel free to come in anytime you have a contribution. Interesting. And since I'm actually scrolling through the screen and reading the answers of different participants, maybe it's an opportunity for everyone to get to know everyone in some form or the other. All right. I'm going to wait one more minute before I move on from the screen. So if you didn't get a chance to add your introduction, it would be great if you can add it to the chat. Actually, if you allow me, I'm going to leave this going on for a minute, and I just want to make a very quick disclaimer or a quick comment about what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm an educator and I do have a business degree and I do have a decent background in psychology that's out of personal research. And because I've been teaching psychology at A-level for the last 4 years, it's a personal interest of mine. I have not had the opportunity to actually do a degree in psychology. So whatever I talk about today is not psychological information, but rather educational techniques and tips and personal accounts of how it is to be a neurodivergent person. And maybe while everyone adds their introductions, I'll just tell you a little tiny story about me. I am 41 years old and I was diagnosed with ADHD in my early 40s, a little before I turned 40, as well as my two daughters. And that was a life-changing change for us, a positive one, actually. And therefore, and ever since I've embraced the concept of neurodiversity and the fact that we are different and not impaired. And there's a lot of passion that comes from there. Of course, there's a lot of personal education that went into that. So for the past 2 years, I have been reading and researching and studying and applying all my understanding into my classrooms. And again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a field expert. I'm a humbly experienced educator. So I hope that is clear, just in case anyone has any doubts on what I'm saying. And anything I have within this workshop is going to be guided by sources. The sources are always going to be cited. So thank you for everyone that has actually answered the question. I am unfortunately going to have to end it here. And anyone who would like to add their answer didn't get a chance, please add it to the chat. Thank you everyone for sharing your experiences here. And so I want to start with a bunch of questions, or a number of questions for you to consider and think about. So I want you to think whether you've ever noticed a student who's sitting in the corner of a classroom and we feel that they're in their own world, like they're completely far away from us and completely distant, somewhere in outer space. Another student who only seems to do well when working on a very engaging task, something really challenging. Have you ever noticed a student who seems to have phases of like really serious high attention and then suddenly, poof, no attention at all, cannot focus on getting a paper and a pen out of their backpack? Have you ever noticed a student who seems to really try hard, but always eventually loses track? A student who misses the last point discussed, quite often, and always asks you to repeat, Miss, what did you just say? Ma'am, I just said it. Or, Miss, what do I need to do now? I just gave the instruction. Or that student who cannot stop messing around and playing with their desk and their bag and their hair and their colleagues' hair. There has to be something moving with this person. Did you ever notice a great hardworking student who's brilliant and wants to put in all the work, but always misses the deadline? For some reason, even if you give the deadline 1 month ahead. Or a student who always has to create a scene in the class, especially if everybody's focused. Let's say everyone's doing an assignment, everybody's writing, and then suddenly somebody comes up with a fiasco or a scene out of nowhere. Or that student who has a major panic attack every time you give them a big task. And they could have a major anxiety that's very visible physically, or they could simply block completely and stop understanding what you're talking about. And so if you've noticed any of those things, what could they mean? So they could mean a number of things. They could mean low engagement. And low engagement doesn't always reflect on us as teachers or say that we are unable to engage students. We do try our best to engage students, but sometimes, it's given. We have curricula to cover, we have requirements by our schools. We can't always entertain our students continuously in class. So sometimes students are not engaged, they're not interested. Another thing that this indicates is somebody's really inability to focus. And it's not a willing inability. It's not that I don't want to focus. Is that maybe I can't, I'm confused or I'm overwhelmed. Sometimes, that student who's just sitting in the corner for an entire year, doesn't say a word, doesn't seem to be with us. That's somebody that might have internal hyperactivity, meaning there's a storm in their brain. Like literally, I call it a hurricane, a brain hurricane, and they're just absolutely quiet on the outside. So we sometimes might look at them and say, مش معانا, they're not with us. And maybe they don't understand. Maybe they're not interested. Hyperactivity in general, somebody who's always running around, somebody who has to move in class. It could also indicate a lack of fulfillment, and that links to low engagement, which means, you know, I don't know. I'm not doing anything. It's not feeling good. I don't feel like it's of any value. Can anyone think of any other challenges that might reflect on student behavior in the ways that I have just talked about? If you do, please feel free to share them on the actual meeting chat. So why students might be the way we've just discussed in the last 4 slides. Yes, obviously, said Mariam, students with ADHD usually have all those effects and symptoms. Thank you for your contribution. Hala. What I always aim to do is I aim to steer away from a label, but I will use this label of ADHD at some point. Difficulty interacting with the teacher and students, yes, maybe that could also be a concept, like that could result in what we've just seen. But that would also sometimes stem from an internal struggle, maybe lack of confidence. Thank you. That's also something very important. It might be that lack of confidence is a result of a condition like the one we're going to talk about. Family issues, definitely sometimes. And that's why it's important to look beyond what our students do and try and see why they're doing it. And that sometimes gives me a lot of, not a struggle and not a hassle, but it gives me a mental load in class, but I still can't do it any other way. I always pay too much attention actually to what my students feel and how they react. And I always try to dig deeper. Definitely language barriers is one good reason for that. Autistic students, yes, at some point, if they get very overwhelmed very easily. Okay, I'll look at the rest of the comments as they flow in. What I want to say right now is the following. Whether we label students' condition or not, it does not matter. But we have to maybe as educators agree on one simple thing. I firmly and wholeheartedly throughout my experience and throughout my life as a student believe that no student who actually suffers with any of those, like hyperactivity, inattentiveness, or both, does it actually intentionally. No student wants to fall short on academics. No student wants to not feel that they can and they do things in a very different way or in a distinguished way. And those students who do fall short are worthy of our attention. How do we do that? And I do realize as teachers, our loads are sometimes impossible. But let's see a couple of, once we dig into ADHD a little more, we'll talk about very practical tips and tricks that I have been implementing for a while and I've learned about and tried myself. So one more question, and I would give, if it's okay, about 2-3 minutes for everyone to answer that. So the question would be, do you currently teach any students formally diagnosed with ADHD? I would appreciate your quick vote on that so we have an idea of how it is and what the group has as a general experience. If anyone has not yet joined our presentation so that they can cast their vote and answer the questions, I'd like you to check back into the chat. You'll find a link that you can click on. It just requires your name to be typed in and you will join. Thank you to the admin for resharing the link. I appreciate it. Okay, we're getting the votes in. I will share a little insight as to why I have this question. For the longest time, again, I've been teaching 14 years, and funny enough, I've only started hearing about ADHD diagnosed cases in the last 3 years. And to me, this was very odd. And I do have a couple of explanations in my head as to why this is. And I think I've tried to open up Pandora's box once. My daughter and I got the diagnosis. My youngest is in school, obviously. And I spoke so loudly about it, so vocally about it, that I right now feel that a lot of my students are much more vocal about it. And I've tried to advocate for more awareness on the topic because I think it has been misviewed in the past. And up until today, we do struggle with the stigma of everybody is a little ADHD. That just a kid that doesn't want to behave. So it's interesting to see that a good number of people have, there's a balance between yes and no. And a number of you who say your institution does not communicate such issues. And I do understand that. I've been in one such institution where any learning challenges or difficulties are not communicated with teachers due to parental restrictions. All right, I am going to give just a couple more seconds for this question, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you for your question. So I'm being asked, how do you know if a diagnosis is accurate? Okay. I will assume that a diagnosis is accurate if it comes out of a psychiatrist and a testing center. So OCD is something not in my area of experience, so obsessive compulsive disorder, but for ADHD, from my personal experience, a psychiatrist can do an evaluation, and they do it using a self-report and a bunch of forms that are given to a parent, a teacher, and a student, and an actual interview. And then there is a technical, a test called the TOVA. And the TOVA is a very reliable test. It's validated worldwide. And that would give you an actual measurable level of how inattentive a person is. So if you do those two together, and you are very aware of what the symptoms are and what are the co-occurring conditions are, then the diagnosis is a valid one. I think you need to make sure the diagnosis is accurate if a child is going to be medicated. Otherwise, yeah, it could be sometimes actually we've had kids that thought they have ADHD and then ended up realizing that it's more like PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and they cause very similar symptoms. Anxiety as well causes very similar symptoms to ADHD. So it has to be like a multi-layered test. And in my case, we started with an IQ test for my daughter, where we wanted to make sure that the cognitive abilities of my daughter are at a good status. And during that test, she was also observed for her behavior. So it was actually a three-phase diagnosis. Please, yes, if you can answer, because I'm going to end it right now. At any point, you're going to get a lot of those, so please just go ahead and vote very quickly. Thank you, Niraz, for your question. I hope I've answered it. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So One more vote, please, and I would appreciate it if you can all just click away very quickly so we can move on. The question is, do any of your current students obstruct lesson progress due to excessive hyperactivity or problematic behavior? Do you have those very challenging students in class? So that, I think that's a quick vote. Okay. One more minute before moving on. Okay. It is very interesting that some do not have that, so that's a blessing. I guess I can relate in the classes where I have about 10 students and rather than 20. So I could, especially in subjects where my students choose the subjects that they're taking. And I will be moving on once we hit 30 votes. Okay. Actually, I hope everyone's okay with it. I'm going to move on from this question. Thank you for your answers. One more, please. Bear with me. Just to get an understanding of the scene we have. So to what extent do you feel you do understand ADHD and what it means for adolescents and children? So not much, just what you hear here and there. You've read and heard a little about ADHD, but do not have a full understanding of its symptoms, or you know enough to help yourself understand and accommodate student needs. It would be great if as many of you as possible please answer this one, so we know how to gear the rest of the conversation. Okay. Okay, so we have a spectrum of information, like of knowledge levels on ADHD, which is very interesting. I am going to move on, not move on. I will move on from this question right now if you allow me to. Thank you for, well, votes are coming in, so I'm going to wait a couple of seconds. All right, we're moving on. Thank you for everyone that shared their answers here. Oh, and the last one, do you believe any of your students might have ADHD yet are not diagnosed? And to me, this is a very important one. Not really everyone can be a little ADHD. In my school, ADHD diagnosis is and support is sufficient. Parents are hesitant to formally diagnose, but some students definitely have symptoms. That's going to be very interesting to see on how it goes. It seems that we have some new joiners. If you've just joined the session, I would appreciate it if you can join the presentation through the link if you haven't done so already. We have a good number of attendees that are on there, and that would allow you to see my presentation on your screen and share your opinion through the polls and the questions that we have. If by any chance your presentation doesn't seem to reflect what's on the screen, there's a little refresh button on top of your screen, and you can refresh and it'll just get you back up to speed on where we are right now. All right, I am going to. It's interesting that every time I think of ending a question, votes start coming in. So thank you for everyone. It seems that the majority of us think that parents are hesitant to formally diagnose. And yes, I do understand them. I can see that in my own community, and we'll discuss that in a bit. Okay, thank you for your input. We're moving on. Okay, I would like to hear from you a little more right now on what's the main challenge you face in teaching students with learning difficulties. Just a brief couple of words that you'd like to share with us would be highly appreciated. So just actually one challenge, the main and most pressing challenge that you feel. If you're not logged in or you're having a hard time answering on the quizzes presentation, please go ahead and answer in the chat so that we can start moving on into, okay, to get them to focus. Thank you. Focus and attention. Interesting. Yes. Okay. Inattention, easily distracted, created. So, Ms. Rima, you're saying it's a challenge to create a differentiated activity. Definitely. And maybe today's workshop will help because I have some things that work for like differentiation, but not for a specific person, because it's very hard to do that in a class, especially when you have a large number. Maybe some of the ideas that I will propose today will help. Please let me know if they do. All right. Interesting. Focus, affecting others without learning disabilities. All right. The number of students in the classroom is the main challenge. Disabilities. Interesting. Very interesting, Ms. Nada. Keep them focused all the time, attract their attention, focus. I am very interested to read the number of answers on keeping them focused, because yes, we usually believe a preconception that we all have in our heads is that we need our kids to focus in a certain way the whole time during a class. But I do know that all modern education systems preach things that sometimes in class are very impractical. And we feel like there's a lot of pressure. So I want to deliver all my content. I want to do all my assessments, yet my students aren't able to sit still and focus for a 45-minute session. I mean, I would like you to like take a second and reflect back. If I wasn't asking questions right now and kind of pushing everyone to somehow write something or answer, and I was just speaking the whole time throughout this session, so we're only like 35 minutes in, we have another 40 minutes, let's say, left. To what extent do you feel that you would be able to listen? Yeah, maybe I'm animated and I move around and maybe I have some nice visuals, but would you not phase out completely? So I do understand that we all get very creative sometimes, but I tend to fall for the trap of planning something and working so hard to plan something and then finding a reaction from my students that where that thing did not work and I would have a hard time changing. So just a spark to think about. Children being distracted, inclusion, thank you. Yes, individual differences. Interesting. Miss May, thank you. Ms. Sara, yes, I agree. We do not have the facilities to provide the students with the support that they need, especially extra time. It is really difficult. Okay. Lack of resources, special attention. Interesting. Mr. Ahad, thank you. Learning difficulties. It would be interesting if everyone can just look through the answers of our colleagues. Oh, Mr. Bilal, definitely. I do agree. The fact that students with any difficulties or any challenge are somehow pushed aside, they're stigmatized, they're bullied is a major challenge. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. If I may, I will proceed and move on from this question. Thank you for everyone that shared their challenges with us. If you still haven't shared and you'd like to, please go ahead and post it on the chat. Okay. So enough with the questions, and thank you for bearing with me. I would like to start with give a formal definition of ADHD. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's a very interesting thing that I would like to point out. It's not a deficit of attention. And this is all the new research that's coming out and all the new conversations that are coming out about ADHD. Maybe it's worthwhile understanding that we do not have a deficit of attention. Actually, we have an overabundance of attention, but to the wrong things, at least the things that are not necessary right now. And that's a very interesting one to think about. But the formal definition, and I think over time they're going to adjust it, it's an attention deficit and a hyperactivity disorder. People can be diagnosed, by the way, as ADHD, which is hyperactivity, the side of hyperactivity, ADD with the attention deficit, and some people may be a mix of both, and they're not two different disorders, and a person can go from one side to the other depending on the place they are. So maybe for me, I am usually the ADHD type. I've always been called imajga when I was young, yet it depends. Sometimes I could be sitting in a gathering of 50 people and I could just be staring into a wall. So that would be me on the inattentive side. It's one of the most common mental health disorders affecting children. The symptoms of ADHD include inattention, so being unable to keep focus on the task at hand, hyperactivity, which is excessive movement, and that doesn't fit within the setting. So for example, I'm sitting in a workshop right now, and I tend to shift in my seat more than like 4 or 5 times every 15 minutes. And impulsivity. So those are hasty acts that occur in the moment without thought. So if a person with ADHD feels like doing anything that's not appropriate, they would go ahead and do it because they have a problem with controlling their impulses, and they're just like really impulsive and they go out there and get it done. All right. How ADHD can impact learning? There are a number of ways. And the first thing that we don't understand about ADHD commonly, at least I did not until I started my own research, is reduced executive function. So one of the regions of the brain, and it's called the prefrontal cortex, is responsible. And again, I'm not talking technically, I'm talking based on my own research. It's responsible for helping us prioritize tasks and organize our time and go with deadlines and just organization in general. For people with ADHD, we do have executive function or executive dysfunction. So I would tend to have 20 things to do, and I would just sit there and not know where to start. So that's a challenge that a student can really suffer from. Another one is hyperactivity. So when we ask a student to sit still in a class for 45 minutes or 50 minutes, it is an impossible task. So I tend to have students roaming around in the back of my class sometimes. And I personally have a good bunch of those squishy toys in the front of my class, because if a student is really fidgety and they start doing this with their pen, it's pretty annoying. And I am oversensitive, and I know they need to. So I always have something that they can play around with that's not noisy, but they have to fidget. And if you stop them from fidgeting, it's like you're choking them. Trouble paying attention? Yes, it's to what they need to. So you could be explaining the next exam and giving hints, and the student would just phase out. Disorganization. Remember, we talked about executive function or executive dysfunction. This also means that a person with ADHD will definitely lose their papers, definitely misplace their backpack sometimes, or not know where they just put their phone, because their working memory is really bad. So they would not remember something they've done just now, and they might remember something that happened to them 10 years ago. Impulsivity. So sometimes you'd find a student in class that just pops up with the most random comment or random answer, or just immediately gets up out of their seat and walks to the front of the class to do something, and they don't realize that it's not okay. Mr. Yusuf, I just noticed your comment. To a certain extent, we do have very abundant symptoms right now, but to be diagnosed, obviously, formally with ADHD, you do need about 9 symptoms. I'll double check that number, but there's a certain number of symptoms that you need to have, and you do need to have them since birth or since early childhood, and they have to be consistent. But what we see in our classes is usually just probably frustration and anxiety and maybe just boredom. So what I will talk about in terms of strategies might actually help everyone and not just people with ADHD. But whatever you see for an ADHD diagnosed person, you're talking about that amplified 20 times in their heads at least. And okay, so we have lack of attention to detail. A student would be doing a task and they would be so engaged in it, but they would miss out one keyword in the prompt or the question that they could miss out an entire question. Mr. Assam, I'll read your comment in a second and I'll get back to it. Thank you very much. Finally, I want to make it a clear point. ADHD is not a learning disability. It's often been labeled as such. Thank you, Mr. Awan, for the 6 symptoms. Yes, according to the DSM-5. There was a range, and I was hearing about it recently. I could not recall the number. Thank you very much. Hala, I want to really please emphasize, it's not a learning disability. God bless anyone with a learning disability. These are actually major problems where a student has a disability. ADHD simply causes a difficulty in learning. And the fact that a lot of us get diagnosed as adults, so it means I spent 40 years of my life, I did my bachelor degree, I did my IB diploma, and I've done pretty fine without the diagnosis, means that it's not a disability, it was just a difficulty, because I do recall how hard it was to do certain things in school. Maybe I was fortunate to have the privilege of a specific educational system. But again, it's very important to understand and maybe to explain to our students if they have it, you are not impaired. You just have a challenge to deal with the current situation and we just have to work around it. So learning difficulties are basically challenges or they're barriers that a student may face learning in a traditional classroom. And we have to probably be honest about this. Even in the most advanced of educational systems, and even in the most engaging of classrooms, we sometimes tend to fall back onto traditional classroom tactics because we have administrative requirements. So if I have a very short amount of time to cover a very large curriculum, and my students are not autonomous learners and they haven't learned to, work on their own, and they need everything given to them at some point because it's a system that's been going on for a while and it's hard to change, I will have to resort to classic old school teaching at some point. So those students will actually feel that it's a barrier. They do not connect to a child's intellectual ability or capability, but they simply impair their ability to learn and focus the same way as everybody else. So maybe a student with ADHD would be solving a math problem and they do it all in their head and they just give you the answer, but you need them to write every step. And when you ask them to write every step, they'll simply lose track of what the answer is. I've personally seen that with my daughter. When the teachers have asked her to show her work, she gets it wrong. If she does it in her head, it's all perfect. On the other hand, learning disabilities are much more severe. They need much more support than a learning difficulty, and they are definitely not my area of expertise, so I will not be discussing any of that today. I would like to look at the chat. So we have determining the type and degree of learning difficulty, prepare worksheets appropriate for each degree, integrate learners. Thank you, Mr. Assam. That's very interesting input into how we can actually support those students. And I do agree, Ms. Hannah, on we have to pay attention. Now, my experience, I'm currently teaching only seniors and juniors, so grade 11 and 12. In the last 4 years, I've been teaching 9, 10, 11, and 12. So the worksheets are definitely more handy for the younger grades. And I do commend how much effort teachers of younger grades work to differentiate. Differentiation on my side happens in the classroom in a very practical sense. We'll touch upon that in a second. So just to wrap that idea up, ADHD is not a learning disability. It does not affect a person's ability to learn a specific skill set, such as reading, writing, or mathematics. So it's just a challenge to learning the classic way. I am going to tell you a little bit. I think I've covered that throughout, but just to make it a little more formal, how does it feel inside a neurodivergent's head? So I've told you that I was diagnosed a year and a half ago, almost. My daughter was diagnosed before I was because when she was having a hard time in general and we went through the process, the doctor brought it up. And the minute we read through the symptom list, we both went like, oh, okay. So that kind of explains why we're feeling the way we're feeling. Now, the reason why I keep referring to myself as a neurodivergent, it's because we have a spectrum. So somebody who's a neurotypical person is very well organized, calm, structured, and can have the patience to go through tasks that are really, detailed, require a lot of focus. Max neurodivergent is somebody that has to be popping in and out and jumping around the whole time. And we all fall somewhere around that spectrum. So not any of us is either this or that. We're somewhere on the spectrum depending on too many factors, but it is a very commonly misunderstood mental health disorder. Sometimes it's underdiagnosed. So in girls, it's been underdiagnosed for the longest time because we as girls or females mask it. So nobody could have noticed for 40 years of my life that I had ADHD because I've learned to cover it up and internalize it at some point. Maybe my hyperactivity was targeted towards projects and work and field work mainly before education as well. Overdiagnosed, I think a lot of us feel that there's a challenge in the way it's being diagnosed right now in Amman, at least, or in Jordan. Because we feel that every other student, as somebody, one of you gentlemen or ladies mentioned, we can diagnose everyone with it right now, which is why it's important for us to evaluate whether the diagnosis is a valid one or not. Ms. Rawan, yes, usually girls are ADD or on the spectrum of inattention. But for example, my eldest, when she was younger and I had no information about it, she was super hyperactive. She internalized it as she grew up and it became inattention rather than hyperactivity. There are, again, many common symptoms with other disorders. So again, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, depressive symptoms sometimes may manifest and may seem to us like inattention. Every mental health disorder has something in common, and it is very stigmatized, and it's not understood as a variation. And again, as a part of a spectrum, it's understood as a disorder. انت مريضة. No. بدك علاج. لا, I don't want to be treated. I want to manage my symptoms. I don't want to be treated. I am not sick to be treated. I'm just different. A little more. One analogy that changed my life. I read a book by Tom Hartman and it's called A Hunter in a Farmer's World. It's highly recommended for anyone that wants to learn a bit more about ADHD. And the one thing that stuck in my head is that a neurodivergent person is a hunter in a world made for farmers. So he discusses the evolution of our the disorder and our the evolution of humanity. And he says very clearly, imagine that you are a hunter who's constantly on alert, looking out for danger, looking out for potential feasts or things that you could actually hunt and gather for your survival. And then you suddenly find yourself living in a world where somebody is harvesting the crops and planting the seeds and waiting for 6 months for the seeds to grow and bloom. And that is a completely challenging world. So it's an interesting analogy. Sorry, the name Naima, I think. Thank you. Yes, they are categories of people with special needs, but I personally think this label is a little inappropriate, but as long as we help them, it doesn't matter. And finally, if you look at the diagram in front of you, you'd realize that neurotypical brain at the bottom, the networks in the brain are very organized and they're clear and the lines are clear and things go around. These are people who are patient, aware, they prioritize things, and that's the neurotypical person. They're flexible, they have typical development, cooperative, they're coordinated, lovable, regulated, focused, and organized. This is what we expect everyone to be, but what a neurodivergent is. Somebody who's diagnosed with ADHD has hyperactivity. They're very engaging, though. They're very entertaining. They are very messy. And sometimes we have our own organized chaos. They have a lot of confusion. Like they have all these crazy ideas that pop up sometimes, and they're very creative, but that's a super skill that we don't notice enough. They are hyper focused. So if I am working on a task, it's impossible to get me off of it if I am really engaged. I will send the name of the book in a second. Thank you for your question. And they are very emotional. They're very lovable, and they're always up and running for a problem to be solved. I have a question for you, please. If all of you could try and answer it, please. And it says, describe that one student who stands out during this year and constantly challenges you positively, negatively. Could it be through the inability to sit still, having low focus, missing deadlines, having a hard time following instructions, and have you tried any strategy to help, and did it work? Thank you, Ms. Shamsa, for sharing that. It is, and it's an excellent book. I don't know if anybody has read it. Interesting, Mr. Yusuf, thank you. If you have any questions, I mean, in the next phase, in the next 20 minutes, I'll be covering strategies on what we could do in class in a practical sense. I hope this section and this segment of the presentation or workshop was engaging enough for everyone. Apparently, we will be short, like I will have to go through certain things quicker than I thought, but we still have a lot to go. So I would really appreciate your answers as quickly as possible, inshallah. Okay. Using visual prompts, brain breaks. Thank you. The mind maps. Yes, I do agree, Mr. Wan, definitely. Yeah, Miss Claudine, I agree. It's so hard to stand in line if your brain is really active and all over the place. Miss Mary, yes, I agree with this tactic. I actually always ask my students to bring in a notebook that they can doodle on. My daughter has always been labeled as 5-minute crafts in classes until we figured out that she needed to doodle or like draw. Very interesting. All right. Ms. Shamsa, can you give me a little more detail? What kind of differentiated activities, if there's an idea, maybe because sharing those ideas would definitely help all our colleagues and help us all. Citranim. This is an interesting case. I don't know how old the student is, but I think بهاي الحالة, in this case, it's definitely important to seek professional help in the school. It might be an indication of many things, not necessarily ADHD. So it would be worthwhile to talk to the parents and figure out what might be going on with this child. And I'm not the expert on this, but I do believe that, by the way, autism also interconnects to ADHD a lot. But in the case of autism, it's going to be a problem with understanding others and having emotional intelligence and connecting. So that's also a possibility to look at. Yes, making noises is pretty tough to handle, especially with younger classes. للأسف, Mr. Youssef, yes, sometimes it's very hard to get the action that you need, which is why in the next section, I'm going to hopefully guide you to take things into your own hands. And for the sake of time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to add any comments that you have or answer to this question on the chat, because yes, I will be moving on from the screen. Now, practically, يا جماعة, we don't want to talk about the problem. We want to talk about the solution. We've talked enough about the problem. With a few changes in the way that we manage our classes, we can really engage the majority of students, and not just students with learning difficulties. So it's worth considering. I do not have to redesign my class only, like redesign certain elements of the class for just a couple of students. It's really worthwhile redesigning your whole system to include bits and pieces that engage everyone. Okay. So my guidelines are three things: engage, support, and scaffold. These are the three key guidelines I have in my head. And for a start, I have a questionnaire that I've created at the beginning of the year, a very humble questionnaire, where I asked students to tell me about themselves. And I absolutely love the outcome. I've heard a lot from students of things that they like to share with me and not publicly. That has helped me deal with them individually without making it a very big deal. So you can actually open this. If you look here, you have open in a new tab. And once you open this questionnaire in a new tab, it will give you the option to duplicate it, adjust it on Google Forms, and maybe use it in your teaching. It has been a very useful form for me. I have grade levels in there, and these are my classes. I've just kept it as it is. And I have a bunch of questions that are rating scale, another Likert scale set of questions. And then finally, something the teacher does in class that works for you, does not work for you, something you want me to know, and why did you choose your subject? Obviously, that fits my teaching, my classes, which is psychology and global politics, and these are option subjects. So feel free to take a copy of this form and adjust it as you see fit. It has been insightful. Next is, I use a lot of visual aids in class, and my classroom is always filled up with a lot of mind maps. What you see here is that students have, all of those little white papers are names of the topics that we had to cover for one section of our grade 12 psychology course. And in that case, I had students stick one topic at a time. Like, I had the skeleton on the wall, and every time we'd finish a topic, there were 45 of those. We'd stick it up for grade 12. We'd put a sticker on it depending on how we felt about it, and we'd write a little note on key things that we need to remember. Absolutely effective strategy of keeping students on track, especially when our topic was so scaffolded. So it is an actual engaging activity. And even though it just happens at the end of the class, it kept them motivated. Miss, we want to finish this section. Khalas, I just want to get all those three stuck up on the wall. So that's a very simple tactic that I highly advise you to use. I always also do checklists on web pages or on pages of the course where we're checking off things that we're done with together. Doodling. Please, if somebody has to doodle, while they listen to you, it's psychologically proven that they can doodle and listen effectively. And sometimes people who are looking at us might not be able to pay attention, but if they look away and they do something else, they'll pay more attention. So I personally allow my students to doodle as much as they want. And sometimes I force them to doodle while making their notes very messy in class. So I'm pushing for that. Annotations and visual cues. You'd find that little like ball over here or a circle with a smiley face. And that was a cue that I gave my students to link the subject to an image so that they would remember it in an exam. So just visual notes, make them funny, make them into acronyms. I've just created an acronym of ASHVIM to have my students remember the sections of an experiment they need to plan. Keep them moving. Grade 12 students, we usually don't think that it works with them. I always have them moving around, sticking things up. It does, again, engage. And if you engage them, you're minimizing the disruptions. And I know it's hard for big groups of younger students. It could be adjusted to smaller groups. So you could have a table of 5 do that and move around and do things around the table. But if you keep them sitting still for 45 minutes, you've lost them. Annotations and visual note-taking. I do model a lot of annotations and a lot of colors. For some it works, for some it's distracting, but I try and give a variety of options for students, and I give them things that they can annotate themselves, but I don't just read a textbook and highlight. I show them how to read a question, how to pull out the keywords. If you notice, I've like pulled out a couple of like the lab experiment, the Ivy, the type of personality, and those things really help keep them on track. And show them how to do it, please, because we always tell them what we expect them to do, but we very rarely show them how to do it. A sense of urgency. Oh, as an ADHD or a neurodivergent, if you don't squeeze me in time, I'll never get something done. So probably the presentation of this workshop was finalized about a couple of days before the first date that was scheduled. And if there's a big task that cannot be done in one big chunk, break it down for your students and give them smaller deadlines and smaller chunks of work, but make it seem urgent. And help them with timers. So I have a timer right now here that says it's an hour, 5 minutes into, yes, a Pomodoro, an hour, 5 minutes into my workshop, and therefore I'm actually speeding up. Pomodoros are excellent. And that's an app, or you can use it online. It gives students timed tasks. They tend to do a lot better when they're timed, and that works for everyone. Varying the tone in your class. So I personally have a Quizlet account, a quizzes account. So this is one tool that I actually use in classes where my students are constantly answering questions as they go, even if they're like multiple choice questions or polls or anything. Quizlet, where there are games, and these are grade 11 students running around and playing a group game, and they ask for it. You have not Notion, sorry, a Padlet where they can actually add their own work. So just keep it going, and there are a lot of free tools, and I'm sure a lot of teachers use Kahoot as well as an interactive tool. Give them a voice. Okay, as an ADHD or a neurodivergent, I do not like being given instructions, and if I am, I will rebel even if I agree. And that applies to all our students. So it's very hard for students, especially if they're neurodivergent, to accept authority. So instead, allow them to take control of their own learning. Even if it's in small things, ask them what they want, ask them what works for them, and give them an opportunity to do that. Even if you want to come up with a list of rules for them, or come up with a behavioral contract, tell them, okay, I need to do this, and you know that. So how can we do it together? What do you think is a good idea? If you give us any sense of control over ourselves and our lives, you've won us over. Give them a voice and allow them the freedom to do things that make them comfortable. In my school and in my class, I have a little more flexibility as to how students sit around the class. If somebody asks me to sit on the floor right in front of the board, I'm not going to say no. If someone asks me to move, I don't say no. If someone has to fidget, I get them things that do not make noises. If someone has to doodle, I do allow. And if someone needs to use the bathroom, even if I know they're not going to the bathroom, especially with older kids, and they just need to take a walk, I'll let them do that. But I've established trust with them that I do understand that you have to do that, and it's not because, and you need to break. And I am almost done. Superskills. Basically, what I would like to just quickly talk about, and I'll skip the rest of the slides that talk about details. This is a mind map that I found from one of my most creative students that would not do well academically. So there was an incident between Ukraine and Russia last year, and he is always in La La Land in class. And I come back to class after an entire break of him sitting and brainstorming and mind mapping the whole scenario and who could have bombed Poland. Was it Russia? Was it Ukraine? What theories could have been there? That's an indication that this is an extremely creative child that wasn't catered to through a regular class. So neurodivergents are super skilled at doing creative things. We need to let them shine. Instead of feeling that they're disorganized, let's understand that they have special abilities to deal with insane changes. Instead of us feeling that they are messy, let's help them with the system and let's allow them the space to be creative. So all of those little things that I've just proposed might support your teaching and the learning of students in your classroom in very practical, simple manners, but trust me, they make a difference. And of course, without the support of the admin or the whole school, you will never be able to do anything massive, but little changes in your own class will really matter. I am going to skip over that. Everyone has a link now, and it's for a resource that's called Teaching and Managing Students with ADHD. It's one of the resources that I often use. I will actually copy the link, and maybe in a bit, I'll share it on the chat so that you can all have access to it. And finally, I'd like you to take the time. If there's anything that you'd like to ask, please, can you add your email address and whatever question you may have that I haven't covered, please send it over here. And in a minute, Miss Rania will wrap up the session, but there's a survey that we kindly ask you to fill out, and everyone will get an attendance certificate for attending the session. I really hope you had an engaging experience and you enjoyed this time. Please go ahead and add your email address and any question, and I will make sure that I get to you as soon as I can. And thank you for your participation and patience with me.
Thank you, Ms. Violet, and we're waiting for your questions.
So, Ms. Rania, just to be clear, it's a Q&A segment right now. Okay, so any questions, please? I might have not been able to get to something on the chat yet. Okay. Anyone has any questions? Other than the ones that are being typed here, anything that I can actually answer maybe right away? Even if it's on the chat. Okay, we have something on the chat. Oh, no, that's the survey.
So that's the survey, yes.
Ms. Sara is saying, I also find this tactic to be very helpful, the Pomodoro. If I'm not mistaken, you're talking about the Pomodoro. It is very helpful, and I'm not sure which tactic you're talking about, Ms. Sara, so I'd appreciate if you tell me. If it's a Pomodoro, it does actually, because when we're limited to time, we kind of have to make the best out of that gap that we have and that section that we have. I often used to give, by the way, for general advice, if you have a task that seems very tedious, for example, I hate clearing up my wardrobe, or I hate clearing up a desk, and especially with children. I mean, as an adult, I have to clear up my desk or I'll be a messy woman. And I don't like that. What I do as a tactic with my daughter is I tell her, okay, mom, 5-minute timer and get whatever you can get done in those 5 minutes. So when she knows that there's a limit and it's not going to be an ever-ending task, she just gets it done. And the funny thing is she comes back and says, my God, it was so easy. I finished so much more than I anticipated in 5 minutes. Even with your students, just tell them, you know what, get whatever you can get done in 5 minutes. You make it less scary for them mentally, because if I give someone a question that's like or a paper that has this much space for writing, they are going to panic. But if you scaffold it and give them like, okay, in the first 5 minutes, we're going to write an intro, and that's just going to be 3 lines, you'll get them going much faster. And that works for everyone, by the way, I hope. Any questions? Any comments?
Good morning, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
First of all, I want to thank you for this lecture. It's been useful to me. I already sent my email to you. I don't have any question right now, but if I had some problem, I will send you. So thank you for this lecture.
It's a pleasure. I hope I was able to give any guidelines, and inshallah, I'll be able to help with any inquiries that you may have. Thank you.
Hi, I already typed my answer. Did you get it?
I wasn't sure if it's okay that I make all the questions public. Would you like me to go and look at it?
Please. And I forgot to type in my email. What can I do now?
I think you can edit your answer that you've just submitted, Steve.
Okay.
And I'm going to look. Your question, could you please elaborate on how neurodivergent know they are different and how they're like to be talked to, no orders? The first section, how we know we are different. We feel that we are less than everybody for all our lives, and we kind of do not understand why. We judge ourselves. So I'm going to give you a very personal example. For the longest time of my life, I used to look at all those teachers, when we get an exam session and everybody's sitting and grading those papers, and in one day grades are out. And I would have been sitting there for a week looking at the papers and fearing my life from starting to grade. And if I do start grade, it takes me like 3-4 days of fighting with my brain to do it. I used to judge myself. And I used to think that I'm so bad at what I'm doing and I'm so undetermined and unfocused. And if you think that and you don't have the information and the awareness that there is something called ADHD, you will not know. But once people do understand how it is to be a neurodivergent, then they might relate. So students right now in my classes come and often ask me about certain things. And I tell them, okay, I'm not going to diagnose. I'm not a professional to do that. Read a bit about it, look at the symptoms, maybe do a self-test online, and then talk to the counselor. So that. And the second part. There are so many other disorders that make that make kids not want to take orders. But if you don't want to diagnose someone, you feel that they are very resistant to any request that you give them, try changing the tone. And try giving them control. So one tactic is, okay, let's put a to-do list together today. You don't have an, either you help me do the to-do list, that's how I speak to my daughter, or I'll do it on your behalf. So I would rather that you're involved. And then it starts taking shape. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Anytime, Siddhi. It's a pleasure.
So thank you, Miss Violet, for this this workshop. And in conclusion of this special workshop at the Queen Rania Academy Forum for Teacher Training 2023, we would like to express our deep thanks to all of you for your effective and inspiring participation. We hope that this meeting has added value to your ideas and educational skills. We remind you that you will receive your certificate of attendance by email, and we urge you, please, to fill out the feedback survey, which help us improve and develop our future experiences. We look forward to seeing you in QRTA's future events. Thank you all.